Well, as I've said many times before, with my 5x5 matrix, one of the whole points is to take these different columns, which are all different streams, different themes, different challenges, different threats, and kind of weave them together into the campaign so you're not doing one after the other, but you're kind of working a little bit on all five at once. So the one I'm going to talk about today, the second one, is called the Tazitta Death Colts. This threat is a regional specific threat that will cause a great deal of problems for the entire area that's west and south of the Darkling Sea. These used to be Northumbria, and this was meant to be the northern threat. However, but it was also meant to not be in Garenport because, of course, the one we talked about last time is featured on Garenport. As the setting has evolved somewhat, the border has shifted. This is now the northern part of Southumbria for the most part. But, you know, whatever. It's just the countryside, let's just say. First, there's a damsel in distress from one of the other columns down below that the PCs will meet as they're traveling from Barrowmere to the east. And they have every reason to do that because the main column that I discussed last time has them having to travel that way. So they're kind of going to run into her whether they want to or not because she's just going to be on the side of the road. And they'll rescue her. I'm not going to talk about that right now because that's part of a different column in the 5x5 matrix, so it'll be a different video. But let me just give a little bit of details about her. She's the daughter of, if not a lord exactly, then certainly a landed gentleman with estates in the more northerly part of Southumbria, a little north of the town of Waller's Grove. His lands and the villages that have grown up around them are not on the map right now, but would be a bit north of Waller's Grove, but not all the way up to Cockrell's Hill. They're nestled in the fairly wide lands between the Chokewater Forest and the Garenkarst Bay. There's an inland village of tenant farmers and freeholders who provide food for the whole area called Reddersville, and near the shores of the bay itself is a small port town of Benchley. This isn't a major center of trade. It's on top of a cliff that goes down to the water's surface for one thing. There isn't a good place to land large loads of goods for miles, but the townsfolk have built a trail of switchbacks that goes down to a broad pier, and mules or donkeys bring smaller loads down to the water or up to the town. Small numbers of passengers make this run too, because it allows easier access to the interior towns north of the Chokewater Forest, Chokewater Ridge, and the Copper Hills than wagon trains from Barrowmere or the rest of Southumbria, who have to go considerably further out of the way. I like this step because it kills two birds with one stone. Like I said, it's directly tied to the fourth column, and rescuing the damsel in distress there is, voila, the same girl we have right here, named Joan Wilmer. She's fairly young. Hopefully the PCs don't think that a 16-year-old girl should be traveling around the hill country on their own, especially as she's been fairly sheltered and naive 16-year-old at that. But if for some reason after the PCs rescue her in the column that's yet to come and just stuff her on a boat, then there's more hints here. She says that before her own kidnapping, people had been going missing in Reddersville and Benchley, and that gossip of strange disappearances were coming down the road from Cockrell's Hill and Piney Top even. They can also hear more gossip from sailors or traders at Burham's Landing or on the ship before it stops briefly at the Benchley docks. Obviously something is threatening the good people of this area, and I presume, and most likely I'm right, the PCs will accompany Joan to her father up in this area so they'll get first-hand view of what's going on. But if not, you know, like I said, there's lots of other ways they can hear about it. This entire column, by the way, I should point out, is kind of optional. There's a whole lot of stuff that I have planned that's going to go on. There's things that I think the PCs are likely to do about it, but they may not. They may not, in fact, even do any of it. And if they don't, that's perfectly fine. The campaign still goes on. None of this is required. This is all kind of something's going to happen. It's going to look bad. Most likely, the PCs are going to go get involved, but we'll see what they actually end up doing. You just never know with PCs. Anyway, this first box here in this column isn't usually how I do things. Rather than describing what villains are doing, it's kind of just a setup and scenario for this particular column of the 5x5 and how the PCs would hear about it. The second box down is the Tazitta tribesmen have been targeting and these are a bunch of savages that live in the Badlands, kind of north of this area. They've been targeting the narrow strip of land from the Copper Hills to the mouth of the Umber River, the majority of the Northwoodshire area. This has so far been small raids on isolated farmsteads and homesteads, so only a single family or small group have been vulnerable. But there's an escalation underway. The village of Roan's Mill, which is between Reddersville and Cockrell's Hill, has been attacked by a much larger raiding party. But given that Roan's Mill has several score people living there, a low stone wall around the settlement, and by luck more than design, they have a more defensible situation. They managed to hole up and hold out and are under a minor siege. This isn't going to last forever, but they can hold out for a day or two, and if, as I think is likely, the PCs have come to Reddersville or Benchley to return Joan to her father, or because of the rumors of trouble that they've heard, or for any other reason, they can be right there when a desperate rider from Roan's Mill shows up looking for help. But again, this happens whether or not the PCs come to Northwoodshire or not, although naturally if they don't come, then Roan's Mill will be in a much more serious situation and will likely suffer many more losses, both deaths in the attack and kidnapped victims who are dragged into the woods for sacrifices. A more curious detail, which again I'll have to figure out how to have the PCs find this out if they aren't here for the attack, but find out they will eventually, is that the Tazitta attackers have created little effigies of the PCs out of bones, feathers, a bit of cloth, etc., and hanged them by the neck with small cords from the branches of the trees on the eaves of the forest where they entered with their captives. Once in the forest, their trail and the trail of their captives is lost as they walked over rocks and through a stream to throw off pursuers. A man from Roan's Mill will know of a famous scholar who lives in nearby Cockrell's Hill, however, after leaving a post at the prestigious Academy of Mittermarkt to retire to the countryside. He supposedly knows more about the forest Tazitta tribes than anyone, having spent many hours interviewing captives or Quislings over the years specifically to gain this knowledge. This will of course be Alpen von Lechfeld himself, unless the players of, well, it will be Alpen von Lechfeld, who will become a major player in another campaign. So I kind of like that he's foreshadowed here, even though his role in this campaign is relatively minor and possibly even skippable, and they may not even find it. Of course, it's entirely possible, like I said, that the PCs don't even go to Roan's Mill or Cockrell's Hill, either one, but the effigies are still there nonetheless. If the PCs ignore that for too long, they'll find that the Tazitta hoodoo witch doctors have some kind of voodoo doll effect on the PCs, and they'll start to notice that things are happening to them because of this. Why do the Tazitta hoodoo witch doctors have these, and why the PCs? I'm not sure yet. Plenty of time to figure that out there, though. In any case, what I think is most likely to happen is that the PCs will be in the area, will consult with von Lechfeld, and he will be able to tell them that a Tazitta Quisling a few years ago gave him a crude yet accurate and useful hand-drawn map of Tazitta sites in the haunted forest, including a few clearings with henges or menhirs, and a village deep in the woods almost against the mountains. There is the mother of all henges in a clearing in this forest near this village. The sacrificial victims, taken from Roan's Mill and elsewhere, won't be sacrificed right away, although the PCs won't know that. So there will be an element of trying to get there before it's too late, I imagine. But the Tazitta tribesmen are waiting on a Nixian sorcerer to perform the sacrifices, so if the PCs are in the area, they could get there before they're actually done. If not, then obviously they won't, and the sacrifices will be worse. In fact, they'll power the voodoo dolls against the PCs, and they'll start working almost immediately. This Nixian guy is from Lomar, and Nixians, I should point out, are non-humans. They're one of the Grisling race. It's one of my races, and there's basically two populations of Grislings. There's the Nixians and the Zobnans, but they both live in Lomar, but they do represent kind of two originally separate ethnic groups that have not assimilated very well together, even though they live in the same city. Anyway, when I go on, the Nixian is from Lomar, and he is even known as a researcher to Professor von Lechfeld. Although he's not known as a cult sorcerer, that's a secret. His name is Ampelius Pictor. If the PCs stop the sacrifices and kill or incapacitate Pictor, the threat from the forest Tazitta clans will be blunted. Honestly, they're not really into this whole death cult thing, and they were wary of the people who tried to drag them into this raiding business. They'd love an excuse to give the whole thing up and slink back into the woods. So this could be a major win for the PCs if they manage somehow to make that happen. It shouldn't be terribly hard if they're successful in any way of getting rid of, like Pictor, who's one of the main instigators of them being involved. If they get rid of him, it shouldn't be hard to convince them to say, you know what, screw it, we're not raiding you guys anymore, and then they've had a major win. If the PCs don't do this, the forest Tazitta will still be unreliable and surly about their involvement in this whole affair, but they will remain a threat to the Northwood Shire nonetheless. Pictor is an ambassador from the cult sent to shore up their support with these sacrifices and a show of witchcraft meant to intimidate and frighten the people of the haunted forest. Oh, by the way, the haunted forest, as its name implies, can be a source of all kinds of other bad news if more is needed for whatever reason. The third stage, then, is to figure out what the devil is going on with the Tazitta and why do they have a Nixian sorcerer working with them, one who's actually well enough known that people in the area, namely Alpen von Lechfeld, can actually give the PCs his exact address in Lomar. If the PCs are not around addressing this stuff, then this stage can be skipped, or if they decide that they'd rather tackle the greater Tazitta cult lands head on, they can also skip it and do that. They can handle this however they like. At least for now, though, that will leave the greater Nixian conspiracy unresolved and unnoticed even. But if they do notice it, this would involve going to Lomar, investigating Pictor's home and or office. Lomar also has a university on par with that at Mittermarkt, and Pictor was a scholar there professionally. Lomar has problems right now. The Nixians are getting a little restless and unruly, and while the Zobnans are sympathetic to their cousin's situation, being a mirror of their own in some ways, they've also established a life many generations now here in Lomar and become relatively friendly with the locals. They trade extensively with the Hillmen and other peoples further west, for instance. And even before settling in Lomar, both the Zobnans and the Nixians had a very different and mutually exclusive view on what it meant to be Hyperboreans. They were from different city-states and their cultures were very different. The Zobnans have no desire to take on the Nixians' strange dark cults and culture, and are starting to get impatient at their lack of assimilation. Pictor was heavily involved in sedition and treason against the government of Lomar, and his people have no desire to see the PCs or anyone else poking around in his affairs and finding that out. One of the reasons that this particular box in the chart works well for me is because not only does it give an opportunity to explore a new area and new people, but it also has a different vibe than the rest of the arc, with intrigue and skullduggery being a major theme. Pictor's death, if the PCs killed him, which they probably will set the death cult back a bit, but the potential fourth and fifth boxes, if the PCs trip them and cause them to happen, are related to this conspiracy. The Tazitta death cults have had their grip on Tazitta society slip in recent generations, and their witch doctors were on the lookout for a way to re-cement their role. The Nixians, on the other hand, have been increasingly frustrated with the Zobnans and Lomar being unwilling to embrace what, to them, were clearly the pure form of Hyperborean culture and cultic religion. The Tazitta witch doctors and the Nixian death priests, who were forced underground by Lomarian law, entered into a pact to enable each other, brokered by the true master of both cults. The Tazitta wanted to rid all of the hill country, or at least Northwood Shire, and the surrounding area, of hillmen and return to their traditional way of life, while the Nixians needed a place to establish their own new city and settlements. The deal that the death cult of the Tazittans made with the death cult of the Nixians requires that the Tazitta clans unite under the leadership of the prophetess and the Nixian death priest to drive the hillmen out of the area. The driving force behind both cults, in spite of their fairly different appearance among two very different ethnic and cultural groups, is one of the feared heresiarchy of the 12, the supervillains of Dark Fantasy X, if you will. Specifically, this one is Jaren Neferkari the Soulless. She hides outside of the world in a realm all of shadow and darkness. It may well be beyond the PCs to storm her fortress in the Shadowlands and kill her. In fact, I very much suspect that it is, unless they're willing to muster an army of hillmen to support them and still make it a Pyrrhic victory. If victory can even be achieved at all. If you've ever read Glenn Cook, imagine a group of scrubby, low-level Warhammer Fantasy roleplay characters taking on one of the 10 who were taken. But still, players are clever. They might well figure something out. So that's the end of this particular arc, and then when I come back, when I come back, I'll talk about the next arc. But in the meantime, I think I want to also take just a little bit of time and talk about some of the setting elements that this one entered into. So I'll make another video where I talk about who the Tazitta people are, talk a little bit more about the Grislings, the Nixians, the Zobnans, what's the difference between them, how they ended up where they are, etc., etc. So that'll be a little bit of a background setting element video, which will provide more context for what I just made in this video.